Hey guys, Britt here. Welcome to End Times Bible Prophecy. Make sure to hit the subscribe, like, and share buttons. Well, in light of recent events that have taken place in Israel over the past week and a half with the attacks by Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, many people are asking, is this conflict described in the Bible? Was it foretold by the Bible? Is this a specific war that's outlined in the Bible or not? So we're going to address that issue today. And I think right off the bat, what I can say is that, well, we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out over the coming days, weeks, and months, because we simply don't know yet. But we're going to speculate a little bit today on maybe what it possibly could be if it describes one of the wars still yet to come that involves Israel. But first I want to talk about what we do know for sure. Well, we do know that these events that have taken place, they just confirm the times in which we live, guys. We live in dark times. We are moving toward the tribulation period, which is described as the time of Jacob's trouble. We see many of the signs that Jesus and the prophets said to look for that would indicate his second coming at the end of the tribulation. I believe the rapture of the church happens before the tribulation. That means we're even closer to that event. But all of this indicates that the stage is being set for that 7-year tribulation period. And I believe Jesus was for sure talking about this event when he said this. It's from Matthew 24, verses 7 through 8. He said, "Nation will go to war against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in many parts of the world. But all this is only the first of the birth pains, with more to come." I think we can say for sure this is one of the birth pains that we are witnessing. Birth pains, of course, increase in frequency and intensity as you get closer to the main event, the birth of the baby. And in this case, Jesus was comparing his coming to the birth of a baby, meaning that these signs, these terrible things that would happen, would increase in frequency and intensity as we got closer to his second coming. So, is this more than simply a birth pain? Is this one of the wars foretold in the Bible? Many people have speculated, well, is this Ezekiel 38:39, the Gog of Magog war? Are we seeing the beginning of this? And I believe the answer is no. Very clearly a no. Why do I say that? Now, we've talked much in the past about how we are seeing the pieces put in place. We're seeing the stage set for that war. We've seen Iran and Russia building closer and closer ties, but even more so over the past year and a half, as Russia has been isolated in the international community due to the invasion of Ukraine. We've seen them move even closer to Iran, who's also been sanctioned by the United States and Western powers. So they're working closer together than ever. And this is an alliance that never has existed in human history up until maybe 30 years ago or so. And we're seeing that alliance grow closer and closer together. We're also seeing Turkey, which was historically it is part of NATO. It's historically been part of that Western U.S. alliance. But we've seen since President Erdogan came into power that Turkey has more straddling the fence, growing closer and closer to Russia and Iran. But Russia in particular, Putin and Erdogan seem to have a tight relationship. So we're seeing this alliance form that includes those countries as well as Afghanistan, some North African countries that have a Russian military presence. So we're seeing that alliance, the stage being set for that. But I do not believe that this current conflict is that what we read about in Ezekiel 38:39. Why do I say that? Well, I say that because it very clearly states that Israel will be in a time of peace a tranquil peace, a land of unwalled villages prior to the Gog of Magog invasion taking place. So we have not seen that. Israel has been basically in a constant state of war and hostilities since its formation in 1948, even though they haven't been in an active hot war every moment of that time. They certainly have not been at peace with all of their immediate neighbors during that time, including 2 weeks ago. So I don't see this being the Ezekiel 38-39 war. However, I believe these events could set the stage for that time of relative peace that takes place prior to Ezekiel 38-39. So if that's not the case, if this isn't the war of Ezekiel 38-39, the Gog of Magog war, well, could it be anything else foretold in the Bible? And I believe the answer is yes. And I believe a prime candidate for that is Psalm 83. Now, as we look at what this says, I want to point out that there are many people who have studied the Bible, who are excellent teachers of the Bible, who believe that Psalm 83 doesn't predict a future war at all. They believe it's simply a prayer. And that's fine. There's nothing, that's a different viewpoint. There's nothing wrong with that viewpoint. Maybe it will turn out to be the correct viewpoint. But I hold a different viewpoint. We're going to look at Psalm 83, and then we're going to talk about why I hold that viewpoint. And I hope that it will encourage you to study this issue for yourself, dig into the original biblical language, and develop and draw your own conclusions. So let's take a look at Psalm 83 and what it says. So this says, "O God, do not be silent, do not be deaf, do not be quiet, O God. Don't you hear the uproar of your enemies? Don't you see that your arrogant enemies are rising up? They devise crafty schemes against your people. They conspire against your precious ones. Come, they say, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence." Yes, this was their unanimous decision. They signed a treaty as allies against you. These Edomites and Ishmaelites, Moabites, Hagrites, Gebalites, Ammonites, and Amalekites, and people from Philistia and Tyre, Assyria has joined them too, and is allied with the descendants of Lot. Do to them as you did to the Midianites, and as you did to Sisera and Jabin at the Kishon River. They were destroyed at Endor, and their decaying corpses fertilized the soil. Let their mighty nobles die, as Oreb and Zeeb did. Let all their princes die like Zebah and Zalmunna did. For they said, let us seize for our own use these pasture lands of God. O my God, scatter them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind. As a fire burns a forest, and as a flame sets mountains ablaze, chase them with your fierce storm, terrify them with your tempest, utterly disgrace them until they submit to your name, O Lord. Let them be ashamed and terrified forever. Let them die in disgrace, then they will learn that you alone are called the Lord, that you alone are the Most High, supreme over all the earth. So again, many people would look at this and say, well, this is a prayer. And this is definitely a prayer. No doubt about it. This is Asaph making this prayer. And of course, people would say, well, Asaph wasn't a prophet, but there are references in the book of Chronicles as well as in the book of Matthew to Asaph being a prophet. So it wouldn't be out of the ordinary for him to issue a prophecy, especially a prophecy that people didn't realize was a prophecy, because we know in Matthew chapter 13, it's referenced that Jesus would speak in parables, and it references Asaph in regard to that, which was a prophecy that people didn't know was a prophecy until we read about it in the New Testament. So we could see the same thing taking place here. Now, again, what else stands out about this? Well, think about some of these things that Israel's enemies would be saying. Come, let us wipe out Israel as a nation. We will destroy the very memory of its existence. Or let us seize for our own use these pasture lands of God. What have we heard for 100 years now? What have we read in the headlines that Israel's neighbors are saying? Israel's enemies, these groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and Palestinian Islamic Jihad, what are they saying? They're saying these exact same phrases. Come, let us wipe away Israel. Let's destroy it. And so we have, again, this connects that same language with what we hear Israel's enemies saying today. So what are these nations that are outlined here? I addressed this in one of the chapters in my book, Signs of the Second Coming, where I outlined what are these nations today. So, we would basically be looking at southern Jordan, northwestern Saudi Arabia, central Jordan, eastern Jordan, north Lebanon, northern Jordan, southern Israel, the Gaza Strip, southern Lebanon, Syria, northern Iraq, and Jordan. Now, some people may have slightly different take on some of these. Maybe they say this is Sinai that they're, but for the most part, we're talking the same geographical areas within a few miles of each other. Nobody's saying this means Japan and Brazil. We're very close in what people's interpretations of where these locations would be. And for the most part, we're seeing a common theme here, which is we see the Gaza Strip, what we would call the Gaza Strip today, what we would call Jordan or the West Bank today, what we would call southern Lebanon today, or parts of Syria and northern Iraq. So where do we see these enemies on Israel's border today? Well, right now, in the midst of this conflict, we're talking about Gaza and the Gaza Strip. But we have threats for some of these other peoples to join in this conflict. We have Hezbollah has issued a statement saying that if Israel has a ground incursion into Gaza and attacks Gaza, that they will declare war on Israel. And then we would have a two-front war. We would have an attack by Hezbollah from southern Lebanon, and I would argue in Syria as well. And then we would have attacks from the Gaza Strip. Would we see any of these groups located in what we would call the West Bank or the nation of Jordan join in as well? Then we would basically have all of the nations that are outlined in Psalm 83 would be joining this war. And that's what we're hearing calls for today. Again, we haven't seen that take place yet. But if we do, that could be an indication that we're seeing the Psalm 83 war. But I believe we could also be seeing the fulfillment of another prophecy and another conflict outlined in the Bible, because I believe the two of these go hand in hand. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about Isaiah chapter 17. There we read about another conflict, and this says, "This message came to me concerning Damascus. Look, the city of Damascus will disappear. It will become a heap of ruins. The towns of Ararat will be deserted. Flocks will graze in the streets and lie down undisturbed. No one to chase them away. The fortified towns of Israel will also be destroyed, and the royal power of Damascus will end. All that remains of Syria will share the fate of Israel's departed glory, declares the Lord of heaven's armies." Depending on your translation, they say Damascus becomes a heap of ruins, never to be inhabited again. Damascus is destroyed. We'll read about this, goes on and describes more of this conflict. Unfortunately, it describes sections of northern Israel also being almost totally destroyed. So I certainly hope that we don't see this happen, but we could be on the brink of seeing this happen. We had a report earlier in the week or early last week stating that through France, Israel had told Syria that they would, if they were attacked from the north, that they would destroy Damascus. So we've seen this threat made. It seems very likely if Israel were attacked, especially with weapons of mass destruction or an overwhelming number of rocket attacks that took out large portions of northern Israel, that they felt that the state of Israel and its existence were under threat, no doubt Israel would respond with everything in its arsenal. And many people have speculated this for years and years, this exact scenario that we're seeing people talking about now, seeing these nations talk about, not just observers, but people who are actively involved with Hezbollah, Syria, Iran, Hamas, and Israel, talking about these things actually taking place that people have talked about for years. Now, why do I connect these two events? There's a reason I connect these two events, and there's a reason why I think Psalm 83 describes a war and isn't simply a prayer. Now, many years ago, I think it was 2008, Bill Salas sent me his book, Israelistine, which is all about the Psalm 83 war. And he put forward this theory that we would see this war take place and it would eliminate the inner threat, the immediate threat on Israel's borders from these groups that we see today, thus creating the conditions where Israel lives in relative peace and tranquility prior to the Ezekiel 38-39 war. And that would describe, or that would help us to figure out why or explain why these traditional enemies of Israel that are on Israel's border are not part of that Ezekiel 38-39 Gog of Magog invasion. And it's because they have already been eliminated as a threat because of the Psalm 83 war. Now, when Bill sent me this book, I thought, wow, this is a great book. I didn't think there was anything controversial about it. It wasn't a new teaching or anything that I thought. It was only a couple of years later that I encountered this pushback from people that said, no, this is just a prayer. It's not a prophecy of a future war. Now, why did I always think this is a war? Well, one of the reasons is if we take verse 13 from Psalm 83, and we'll read that in just a second. This is a prayer by Asaph of saying, do these things to Israel's enemies. And then if we look at verse 13 in Isaiah 17, we will see God saying, this is what I'm going to do to Israel's enemies. And to me, they are one and the same, and it describes the same conflict. So let's take a look at those verses now. So here we have Psalm 83, verse 13. Again, this is Asaph's prayer, and I believe it's unanimous that people agree that this is a prayer that he's making. The only question is, does this prophesy a future event? So he says, "Oh my God, scatter them like tumbleweed, like chaff before the wind." And then we read in Isaiah 17:13, God's reaction to the conflict we read about in Isaiah 17 that includes the destruction of Damascus. He says, "But though they thunder like breakers on a beach," meaning Israel's enemies, "God will silence them and they will run away. They will flee like chaff scattered by the wind, like a tumbleweed whirling before a storm." So here we have some of these exact same words used, tumbleweed, chaff before the wind. Again, you can go and look at the original language. Go study the original language. The wording is not exact to the letter, but it's pretty close to exact to the letter. And when I read that, I think that isn't a mistake that we have these verses calling for the same thing and telling us that the same thing will happen. A prayer to do this to God's enemies, and then God saying, I will do this to Israel's enemies. So to me, that connects these two events, and it makes Psalm 83 clearly a prophecy of a future war involving the nations that are mentioned in that text, which we just went over, would be basically the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and southern Lebanon. So places where Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, all these terrorist groups currently reside. And all of those groups right now in this conflict are saying that if Gaza is invaded, if this ground invasion takes place, that they will join the fight against Israel. And Israel has made it clear this is a fight that they will fight to win and to end, and they will achieve total victory. So we very well may see these events take place where we see in the coming days this ground incursion into Gaza. We see condemnation in the international community, as we've heard before, as we've talked about before. And then we see Hezbollah attack Israel from the north. Now, keep in mind, Hezbollah is much more powerful than Hamas, located in Gaza. Hezbollah is very well trained and equipped and funded by Iran and has been for years. They essentially control the government of Lebanon. They're present in Syria as well. They have hundreds of thousands of rockets that they could fire, advanced rockets that could reach far into Israel. So they are a big threat, quite possibly an existential threat if they are not dealt with severely. And so again, could we see a scenario where Hezbollah enters this war, they cause massive damage to Israel, they're perceived as an existential threat, and in response, Israel completely destroys Hezbollah and Damascus in the process? I believe the answer is yes, we could see that. Now, that doesn't mean we will see that. It's speculation at this moment until we see these events play out. I believe the Bible is 100% accurate, but our perception of events is not 100% accurate. We will have to wait and see what plays out before we know that that's happened. But again, if we do see that happen, again, just as Bill Salus hypothesized in his book many years ago, we would then see that immediate surrounding threat to Israel eliminated. And we would have Israel with these large land buffer zones surrounding its country. They could maybe make those demilitarized zones where no one can live at all. Who knows what we'll see happen in the aftermath of this. But if they did that, that would give Israel this sense of peace and security that we read about in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, setting the stage for the Gog of Magog invasion. And again, we're seeing those nations come together in alliance for the first time in human history. We've been talking about that for years. It seems as if every passing week brings a new news headline, a new bit of information of the cooperation taking place between these nations that are outlined in Ezekiel 38 and 39. So, guys, what does all this mean? All of this means that we are seeing the signs Jesus and the prophets said to look for leading up to the tribulation period and the second coming at the end of that tribulation period. Jesus said in Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, when you begin to see these events, take place, look up, your salvation draws near. I'm right at the door. In other words, Jesus is coming back. We know he's coming back. We just don't know when. But guys, Jesus could return at any moment. And we need to be spreading the good news of Jesus Christ as far and wide to as many people as we can in whatever time we have left. Because I think the time is short. We're seeing these events ramp up. We're seeing the birth pains increase in frequency and intensity. No doubt about it. When you look at, if you've been following Bible prophecy, studying it for a couple of decades or more, you can clearly see how there were large swaths of time where it seemed like nothing was happening. In the last 3 to 4 years, it's really ramped up. Even more so in the last year, even more so in the last week. So guys, there is so much taking place right now. It's like a fire hose of information that we can hardly keep up with. But guys, know this, one way or another, whenever it is, Jesus is coming back, and we need to be telling as many people as we can about the good news that Jesus, while we were still sinners, he came, lived a perfect, sinless life, and died on the cross. He spilled his blood as forgiveness for our sins so that we could be reconciled with God and have eternal life. That is the good news, guys. There is a path to heaven, and it is Jesus. He said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Guys, that's the message we should be spreading to a lost and dying world in these last days. And no doubt about it, guys, all of these events indicate we're in the last days of the last days, heading straight toward the end times. So let me know what you think below. What do you think all of this means? What do you think? Are we going to see the fulfillment of Psalm 83 or Isaiah 17 or both? Or are we going to see something else that maybe I've overlooked? Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe button. When you do that, more people see this video and they hear about the hope we have in Jesus Christ. Because guys, with all the things that are taking place right now, it would be very easy to be down, to be depressed, to be sad. And there are evil things taking place, no doubt about it. Very dark and evil things. And it's difficult to read about them, to hear about them. But guys, we can have hope in a way that others can't, because we know in the end, Jesus is going to be victorious over this lost and dying world. He already has been, but he will come here and he will reign as king from his throne in Jerusalem, and all of this evil will go away. Every teardrop will disappear, and we will have peace and tranquility. Guys, that's the peace and tranquility we pray for. So guys, again, leave your comments below. Let me know what you think. Make sure to hit the like, share, and subscribe buttons. And God willing, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye. If you want to learn more about the end times and Bible prophecy, make sure to sign up for my free monthly newsletter and get your copy of my free ebook, 7 Signs of the End Times. Just follow the link in the description to get your free book. Also, make sure to check out all of my books. Just look up Britt on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks, Google Books, Kobo, or anywhere books are sold. Thanks for watching today, and until next time, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith.